Alright, so now we're ready to build our application using Rails. So again, Rails is an MVC framework built on top of Ruby and some C. It's a great framework, but it could get a little bit complicated, well, a lot complicated, especially if you haven't built things in MVC. So what we'll try to do in this chapter is not to overwhelm you. One advice we would have for you is focus on the fundamentals and focus on the things that we tell you to focus. Do not make your project more complicated than it needs to be by looking into some other Rails codes yet. Let's have you focus on our videos first and get the fundamentals, and later you can do some other cool things using other people's codes or gems. Alright, so focus on the fundamentals. Do not get overwhelmed with all the documentation. We'll try to guide you so that you only learn the things that are really important in the beginning, and later you can look up some of the documentation to learn some other things. Okay, so in this video we're going to teach you how to create a new project and how to start a server, how to start a server so that you can access your application using your browser. Okay, so what we're going to do is I have this folder created called Rails, and this is where I put some of the projects that I created using Rails. To create a new project in Rails, all you do is Rails new and you put in the project name. So let's say my project name was supposed to be sample project. I type that in and it creates a bunch of files for me. Okay, and we'll have another video that talks about what all of these different files mean. You don't have to worry about that right now. Okay, now the default, if I just did Rails new project name, it uses by default a SQL engine called SQLite, and it's a very light database. You can see that that's one of the gems that were installed. SQLite is really convenient. If you need to give someone access to the database, you just send them a copy of that SQLite file. It's a single file, and it would work. So it's good for testing purposes. But let's say you wanted to create MySQL project, a Rails project that uses MySQL as a database. So if you wanted to, create a project but that uses MySQL as the backend, what you would do is Rails new, and let's say you put in the project name, and then you'd put -d for database, and then you use MySQL. And this creates a new project, but it would just configure it so that it uses MySQL is the default engine. So let me go to that file, project that I just created, project MySQL, and I'm going to have another video that talks about all of the different files that were created. But for now, if you just go to config database, this is the file that handles the database. You can see that it has settings for MySQL, for development, test, and production. Whereas if I went to the first project that I created, sample project, and if I go to the database, you can see that it was using SQLite, okay, and it's just a file, okay. But let's use MySQL for the purpose of our training, and what we're going to do is that this is the default setting for MOMP. But what we're going to do is instead of installing a separate MySQL server for Rails, we're just going to have it use the MySQL server that we already created when we install MOMP or WOMP. And so you just put in the setting. I think for MOMP the default password is root, unless you have changed it. You have to change some of these configuration settings to make it work with the MySQL server that you already created using MOMP or WOMP. And so let me show you what the configuration setting needs to look like, and I'll put that below the video. It needs to just look something like this, and I'll copy this so that you can copy and paste this. Put in the database name, and this is the interesting part. You just specify the MySQL socket, and it just connects to that MySQL database. And the benefit of doing this is now you can use MySQL Workbench, which you're already familiar with. You don't need to download new tools. You can just use MySQL Workbench to access the database that will be created and managed using your Rails application. Okay, so another thing, you may already be familiar with this, you can also do Rails console, and you can type in some Ruby commands here, like a equals to, puts a, hi, and you can do some other advanced things using this Rails console. Later when you learn about different models and whatnot, this can come in really handy. But for now, we're just going to exit it. Okay, so in this video, you just learned about how to create a new Rails project. Again, by default, it creates a SQLite. It uses SQLite as the database end. If you want to use MySQL, then you do Rails new project name -d space MySQL. Okay, and one thing that I don't think I talked about yet. Okay, let me find out where I am. Let me go to the okay, let me go to the project that I just created by project MySQL. So how do you start a web server? When you create a new project, you can start a web server for that particular project. So go to the project folder that you created using Rails and type in Rails S, and this starts a server. You can also type in Rails server, and that should work just fine. And you can see the URL over here that it created is running a web server. So you can go, and if you see this message, that means that your installation went through just fine. And there are some great links to some of the great documentation, although some of the documentation over here, be careful because it could be too much. And again, there are probably only 10% of the stuff that you will see here that you will be using, and to build 95% of your code. So don't get overwhelmed. Okay, all right. So in order to get out of the server, I can just do Control-C to shut down the server. If you are creating and if you're building things in Rails, it's usually good to have a few tabs open, one to run the web server and one to do some other command prompt stuff. Okay, but if you want to get out of this, you can do Control-C and it would exit. And if I go, it's because I exited the server, it doesn't allow you to access it. But I can start the server again, Rails S, and it starts the web server again. Okay, all right, sounds good. So again, as you watch the video, just type along, do the exact same thing that we're doing in the video, and with repetition, I think things like this will become a lot easier. In Rails, you're using command prompt a lot, so you'll need to get familiar with how to use your terminal or how to use your command prompt. Okay,